Question 1. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing Advanced Intrusion Prevention System (IPS) signatures on a Cisco ASA firewall for a critical internal segment would significantly increase processing overhead, potentially impacting application performance. However, recent threat intelligence indicates a rise in sophisticated attacks targeting this specific segment. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional security best practices and the implied regulatory framework for the SAEXS exam? Option A. Implement the advanced IPS signatures without further tuning or monitoring, assuming the security benefits outweigh any potential performance degradation. Option B. Disable all IPS functionality on this segment to eliminate any performance impact, focusing security efforts on other network layers. Option C. Defer the implementation of advanced IPS signatures until hardware upgrades are feasible, relying on existing basic signatures and perimeter defenses. Option D. Implement the advanced IPS signatures, but carefully tune them to minimize false positives and monitor performance closely, documenting any impact and developing mitigation strategies if necessary. Correct answer is D. Implement the advanced IPS signatures, but carefully tune them to minimize false positives and monitor performance closely, documenting any impact and developing mitigation strategies if necessary. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing security posture with operational efficiency and compliance requirements within the specific regulatory framework of the 500-260 Cisco ASA Express Security (SAEXS) exam. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting and applying the relevant security guidelines to a practical deployment decision, ensuring that the chosen solution is both effective and compliant. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a comprehensive understanding of the threat landscape and the specific vulnerabilities addressed by the chosen security feature. It aligns with the principle of least privilege and defense in depth, ensuring that security controls are implemented in a manner that is both robust and justifiable. Adherence to the SAEXS exam's implied regulatory framework, which emphasizes secure network configurations and threat mitigation, is paramount. This approach demonstrates a proactive stance towards security, considering potential impacts and ensuring that the implementation is well documented and auditable. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without adequately assessing the security implications would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the potential risks and liabilities associated with inadequate security, which could lead to data breaches, service disruptions, and reputational damage. Such an approach would likely violate implicit regulatory requirement for due diligence in security deployments. Another incorrect approach that involves implementing a security feature without understanding its operational impact or potential for misconfiguration is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of thoroughness and could inadvertently create new security gaps or hinder legitimate network traffic. This failure to conduct proper testing and validation would be a direct contravention of best practices for secure system deployment. A third incorrect approach that bypasses established change management and approval processes for security-related configurations would be professionally unacceptable. This undermines the integrity of the security infrastructure and introduces an unacceptable level of risk by operating outside of documented and reviewed procedures. This directly conflicts with the principles of accountability and governance essential in any regulated environment. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured assessment of security requirements, threat modeling, evaluation of available security controls, and a thorough cost-benefit analysis that explicitly includes the cost of potential security incidents. It requires consulting relevant documentation, understanding the operational context, and seeking input from relevant stakeholders. Decision-making should be guided by a risk-based approach, prioritizing solutions that offer the most effective protection against identified threats while remaining within budgetary and operational constraints, and always in alignment with the specific regulatory framework governing the deployment. Question 2. Examination of the data shows a critical vulnerability has been identified in the Cisco ASA firewall software, with active exploitation being reported in the wild. The organization relies heavily on these firewalls for network segmentation and perimeter security. The IT security team has obtained the vendor-provided patch. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action to mitigate this risk? Option A. deploy the patch to a small, non-critical segment of the network for initial testing, and if successful, proceed with a phased rollout to the rest of the infrastructure. Option B, immediately deploy the patch to all Cisco ASA firewalls across the entire organization to ensure all systems are protected as quickly as possible. Option C, schedule the patch deployment for a future maintenance window, prioritizing other ongoing projects until the risk of disruption can be fully assessed. Option D, apply the patch to a select group of firewalls and leave the remaining firewalls unpatched until a later date, to observe the impact of the patch on the initial deployment. The correct answer is A. Deploy the patch to a small, non-critical segment of the network for initial testing, and if successful, proceed with a phased rollout to the rest of the infrastructure. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in network security where a critical vulnerability is identified in a widely deployed Cisco ASA firewall. The professional is faced with the immediate need to mitigate risk while ensuring minimal disruption to business operations. The challenge lies in balancing the urgency of patching a known exploit with the potential for service interruption caused by the update process, especially in a production environment. The need for a swift yet controlled response is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased deployment strategy, starting with a pilot group or a non-critical segment of the network. This allows for thorough testing of the patch in a controlled environment to identify any unforeseen compatibility issues or performance degradations before a full rollout. This methodical approach aligns with best practices for change management in IT security, minimizing the risk of widespread outages. From a regulatory and compliance perspective, especially within a framework like the one implied by the SAEXS exam, which focuses on practical implementation and security best practices, demonstrating due diligence in testing and risk assessment before implementing critical security changes is crucial. It shows a commitment to maintaining service availability and data integrity, which are often implicit or explicit requirements in security frameworks. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing the patch immediately across all firewalls without prior testing is a high-risk approach. This bypasses essential validation steps and could lead to widespread service disruption if the patch introduces unexpected issues. This failure to adequately test before deployment could be seen as a breach of due diligence, potentially violating internal security policies or even broader compliance mandates that require risk mitigation and business continuity. Delaying the patch indefinitely due to fear of disruption is also an unacceptable approach. This leaves the network vulnerable to the known exploit, creating a significant security risk. The failure to address a known, critical vulnerability in a timely manner constitutes negligence and a direct violation of security best practices. It exposes the organization to potential data breaches, financial losses, and reputational damage, which would be viewed unfavorably from any regulatory or compliance standpoint. Applying the patch only to a subset of firewalls and leaving others unpatched indefinitely is also problematic. While it might seem like a compromise, it creates an inconsistent security posture across the network. This can lead to complex troubleshooting, potential security gaps in the unpatched segments, and difficulties in maintaining a unified security policy. Such an inconsistent approach undermines the overall security strategy and can be difficult to justify from an audit or compliance perspective. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured approach to security patching. This involves 1. Vulnerability assessment, identifying and prioritizing vulnerabilities based on severity and exploitability. 2. Risk assessment, evaluating the potential impact of the vulnerability on the organization. 3. Patch management strategy, developing a plan for patch deployment including testing, rollback procedures, and communication. 4. Phased deployment, implementing changes in a controlled manner, starting with less critical systems. 5. Monitoring and verification, continuously monitoring systems post-patch to ensure stability and effectiveness. This systematic process ensures that security is enhanced without compromising operational continuity. Question 3. Performance analysis shows that the Cisco ASA firewall is experiencing intermittent high CPU utilization, leading to packet drops and slow network response times for critical applications. The security team needs to restore optimal performance quickly while ensuring no security vulnerabilities are introduced or existing ones exploited. Option A. Systematically review the ASA's real-time performance monitor traffic logs, an active connection table to identify processes or features consuming excessive CPU. Analyze recent configuration changes and compare current resource utilization against baseline performance data to pinpoint the root cause before implementing any corrective actions. Option B. Immediately disable the intrusion prevention system, IPS, and VPN services on the ASA to reduce the immediate CPU load, with the intention of investigating their impact later once network performance is restored. Option C. Manually adjust the CPU threshold for critical processes to a higher value, effectively masking the high utilization without addressing the underlying cause. Option D. Apply the latest available firmware patch for the ASA without prior testing, assuming it will resolve performance issues based on vendor release notes. The correct answer is A. Systematically review the ASA's real-time performance monitor, traffic logs, and active connection table to identify processes or features consuming excessive CPU. Analyze recent configuration changes and compare current resource utilization against baseline performance data to pinpoint the root cause before implementing any corrective actions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in network security where a critical security appliance, the Cisco ASA firewall, is experiencing performance degradation. The professional's task is to diagnose and resolve this issue without compromising security posture or violating operational best practices. The challenge lies in balancing the need for immediate remediation with the potential for unintended consequences, such as introducing new vulnerabilities or disrupting essential services. The pressure to restore full functionality quickly can lead to hasty decisions, making a structured, evidence-based approach paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic investigation of the ASA's performance metrics, focusing on resource utilization, CPU, memory, traffic throughput, and active connections. This aligns with best practices for network device troubleshooting, emphasizing data-driven diagnosis. Specifically, examining logs for error messages, identifying high resource-consuming features, like complex access control lists, VPN tunnels, or intrusion prevention systems, and reviewing recent configuration changes are critical steps. This methodical process ensures that the root cause is identified and addressed, rather than merely treating symptoms. This approach upholds the principle of least privilege and defense in depth by ensuring that security features remain effective and that no new vulnerabilities are introduced during the troubleshooting process. It also adheres to the implicit requirement of maintaining service availability while ensuring security. Incorrect approaches analysis. Disabling security features without a clear understanding of their impact is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. For instance, arbitrarily turning off intrusion prevention or VPN services to reduce CPU load bypasses critical security controls, leaving the network exposed to threats. This directly violates the principle of maintaining a secure perimeter and protecting sensitive data, which are fundamental tenets of cybersecurity best practices and often mandated by organizational policies and industry standards. Implementing unverified configuration changes or third-party patches without thorough testing is another critical failure. Such actions can introduce instability, unintended security holes, or conflicts with existing configurations. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for change management processes, which are essential for maintaining system integrity and security. It can lead to a breach of confidentiality, integrity, or availability, all of which have serious implications. Ignoring system logs and performance metrics in favor of anecdotal evidence or guesswork is unprofessional and ineffective. Security incidents and performance issues are best resolved through objective data analysis. Relying on intuition rather than empirical evidence can lead to misdiagnosis, prolonged downtime, and potentially exacerbate the problem. This approach fails to meet the standard of care expected of a security professional. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach performance issues with a structured methodology. This typically involves 1. Problem identification. Clearly define the observed symptoms. 2. Information gathering. Collect relevant data including logs, performance metrics, and configuration details. 3. Hypothesis generation. Formulate potential causes based on the gathered data. 4. Testing and verification. Systematically test hypotheses starting with the most probable causes. 5. Resolution. Implement the identified solution. 6. Validation. Confirm that the issue is resolved and monitor for recurrence. 7. Documentation. Record the problem, solution, and lessons learned. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, risks are mitigated, and the security posture is maintained or improved. Question 4. The audit findings indicate that the primary Cisco ASA firewall protecting the organization's sensitive customer data is running firmware that is 2 major versions behind the latest stable release, and a critical vulnerability has been publicly disclosed for the current firmware version. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action to address this security risk? Option A. Defer the firmware upgrade until the next scheduled major network infrastructure overhaul, which is planned for 18 months from now. Option B. Schedule a maintenance window to perform a phased firmware upgrade, starting with testing in a lab environment, followed by a production deployment with a rollback plan. Option C. Immediately initiate the firmware upgrade on the production ASA firewall without prior testing to mitigate the disclosed vulnerability as quickly as possible. Option D. Roll back the ASA firewall's firmware to the previous stable version that was in use before the current firmware was installed. Correct answer is B. Schedule a maintenance window to perform a phased firmware upgrade, starting with testing in a lab environment, followed by a production deployment with a rollback plan. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in network security where a critical security device, the Cisco ASA firewall, has outdated firmware. Professional challenge lies in balancing the immediate need for security updates against potential operational disruption and the risk of introducing new vulnerabilities through untested patches. The audit findings highlight a compliance gap, demanding prompt action, but the complexity of a production environment requires a methodical and risk-aware approach. The pressure to resolve the finding quickly can lead to rushed decisions, making careful judgment paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased and controlled deployment of the firmware update. This aligns with best professional practices for managing critical infrastructure changes. It prioritizes minimizing risk by first testing the update in a non-production environment to identify any compatibility issues or performance degradations. Following successful testing, a scheduled maintenance window is essential to implement the update on the production ASA. This minimizes user impact and allows for immediate rollback if unforeseen problems arise. This methodical process directly addresses the audit finding by rectifying the security vulnerability, while adhering to principles of change management and operational stability, which are implicitly expected in any secure IT environment. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing the firmware update immediately on the production ASA without prior testing is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It disregards the principle of due diligence in managing security infrastructure. Such an action could introduce unforeseen bugs or incompatibilities, leading to network outages, data breaches, or denial of service conditions, all of which represent severe security incidents and potential compliance violations. Rolling back the firmware to a previous, known stable version without addressing the security vulnerability, also professionally unacceptable. While it might temporarily restore functionality, it leaves the ASA exposed to known exploits, directly contradicting the purpose of security updates and failing to remediate the audit finding. This approach prioritizes short-term stability over long-term security posture. Delaying the firmware update indefinitely until the next scheduled major upgrade cycle is another failure. This demonstrates a lack of proactive security management and a disregard for the identified risk. Security vulnerabilities are time-sensitive, and delaying remediation based on convenience rather than a risk assessment exposes the organization to unnecessary threats. This approach fails to meet the implicit requirement of maintaining a secure and up-to-date security posture. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the specific risks associated with the outdated firmware, as identified by the audit. This involves consulting vendor advisories and security bulletins. Next, a risk assessment should be performed to evaluate the potential impact of both the vulnerability and the proposed update. The decision-making process should then follow established change management procedures, which typically include A. Thorough testing in a lab or staging environment. B. Developing a detailed implementation plan with rollback procedures. C. Scheduling the change during a low-impact period. And D. post-implementation verification. This structured approach ensures that security improvements are implemented effectively and with minimal disruption, demonstrating professional responsibility and adherence to best practices in cybersecurity management. Question 5. Analysis of a scenario where a Cisco ASA firewall is experiencing intermittent performance degradation, leading to packet drops and increased latency for critical business applications. The security team is under pressure to restore full functionality immediately. What is the most appropriate initial course of action to diagnose and resolve this issue while maintaining the security posture? Option A. Immediately revert the ASA to its last known stable configuration to quickly restore connectivity, assuming the recent changes introduced the problem. Option B. Rely solely on external network performance monitoring tools to identify the extent of the packet loss and latency without directly accessing the ASA's internal diagnostics. Option C. Disable specific security inspection features, such as deep packet inspection or intrusion prevention, on high-traffic interfaces to reduce the processing load. Option D. Systematically examine the ASA's real-time resource utilization, CPU, memory, review system logs for error messages or unusual activity, and correlate these findings with recent network changes or traffic patterns. The correct answer is D. Systematically examine the ASA's real-time resource utilization, CPU, memory, review system logs for error messages or unusual activity, and correlate these findings with recent network changes or traffic patterns. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in network security where a critical security appliance, the Cisco ASA, is experiencing performance degradation. The challenge lies in diagnosing the root cause without introducing further instability or compromising security, especially when dealing with a production environment. The pressure to restore full functionality quickly can lead to hasty decisions, making a systematic and informed approach paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a methodical investigation that prioritizes understanding the ASA's current state and potential contributing factors. This aligns with best professional practices for network security troubleshooting, specifically examining the ASA's resource utilization, CPU, memory, and traffic logs provides objective data to identify anomalies. Correlating these findings with recent network changes or known vulnerabilities is crucial for pinpointing the issue. This systematic process ensures that any remediation steps are targeted and effective, minimizing the risk of unintended consequences. Adhering to established troubleshooting methodologies, often documented in vendor best practices and security frameworks, is a professional imperative. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately reverting to a previous, known good configuration without thorough investigation. This bypasses the diagnostic process and fails to identify the underlying cause of the performance issue. If the problem was due to a new, legitimate traffic pattern or a subtle configuration drift, simply reverting might mask the issue temporarily or fail to address it entirely, potentially leaving the network vulnerable or facing the same problem again. This approach lacks professional rigor and can lead to prolonged downtime or security gaps. Another incorrect approach is to disable security features indiscriminately to alleviate performance pressure. While this might offer temporary relief, it directly compromises the security posture of the network. Features like intrusion prevention, deep packet inspection, or even stateful firewalling are disabled, exposing the network to threats. This is a clear violation of professional responsibility to maintain security and would likely contravene regulatory requirements for data protection and network integrity. A third incorrect approach is to solely rely on external network monitoring tools without examining the ASA's internal diagnostics. External tools can indicate a problem exists, but often lack the granular detail to diagnose the specific cause within the ASA itself. Focusing only on external symptoms without delving into the appliance's operational status is an incomplete troubleshooting methodology and can lead to misdiagnosis and ineffective solutions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first establishing a baseline of normal operation. When deviations occur, a structured troubleshooting methodology is essential. This typically involves 1. Problem identification, clearly defining the symptoms. 2. Information gathering, collecting relevant data from logs, performance metrics, and configuration. 3. Hypothesis generation, forming educated guesses about the cause. 4. Testing, systematically testing hypotheses. 5. Solution implementation, applying the identified fix. 6. Verification, confirming the issue is resolved and no new problems have arisen. This iterative process, grounded in technical understanding and a commitment to security, ensures effective and responsible problem solving. Question 6. Quality control measures reveal that the Cisco ASA firewall's internal log buffer is frequently reaching capacity, leading to the potential loss of older log entries. The IT security team is considering several options to address this issue. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory compliance and professional security best practices for log management? Option A. Disable logging on the Cisco ASA to conserve storage space and prevent buffer overflow issues. Option B. Manually export logs from the ASA to a local drive only when an audit is scheduled. Option C. Periodically clear the ASA's internal log buffer manually to free up space, accepting that older logs will be lost. Option D. Implement an automated log rotation and archival process to a dedicated, secure log server, ensuring long-term retention and accessibility for audit purposes. The correct answer is D. Implement an automated log rotation and archival process to a dedicated, secure log server, ensuring long-term retention and accessibility for audit purposes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to maintaining the integrity and security of network traffic data, specifically logs generated by a Cisco ASA firewall. The challenge lies in balancing the need for efficient log management and storage with the regulatory requirement to retain these logs for a specified period for audit and compliance purposes. Improper handling of logs can lead to significant compliance violations, potential data loss, and an inability to respond effectively to security incidents. The professional must make a judgment call on how to manage these logs without compromising either operational efficiency or regulatory adherence. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves implementing a robust log management strategy that includes regular, automated log rotation and archival to a secure, separate storage location. This ensures that logs are not overwritten or lost due to storage limitations on the ASA itself. Archiving logs to a dedicated system, such as a SIEM, security information and event management, solution, or a secure log server, allows for long-term retention in a tamper-evident manner, fulfilling regulatory requirements for audit trails. This practice aligns with best practices for cybersecurity and compliance, ensuring that logs are available for forensic analysis and regulatory review without impacting the performance of the firewall. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to rely solely on the default log buffer of the Cisco ASA and periodically clear it to free up space. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It directly violates the principle of log retention, as logs older than the buffer capacity will be permanently lost. This makes it impossible to conduct retrospective security audits or investigations, which is a core requirement of many regulatory frameworks. Furthermore, it demonstrates a lack of proactive security management and a disregard for compliance obligations. Another incorrect approach is to disable logging altogether to conserve storage space. This is a critical security and compliance failure. Disabling logging removes the ability to monitor network activity, detect threats, and investigate security incidents. It is a direct contravention of most regulatory mandates that require comprehensive logging of network events. Ethically, it represents a dereliction of duty to protect the organization's network and data. A third incorrect approach is to manually export logs only when an audit is imminent. This is an inefficient and risky practice. It is prone to human error, such as forgetting to export or exporting incomplete data. It also means that logs are not being consistently monitored or analyzed, increasing the risk of undetected security breaches. From a regulatory standpoint, it suggests a reactive rather than proactive approach to compliance, which can be viewed unfavorably during an audit. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a proactive and systematic approach to log management. This involves understanding the specific regulatory requirements for log retention and security relevant to their organization's industry and jurisdiction. They should then design and implement a log management solution that automates log collection, rotation, archival, and secure storage. Regular review and testing of the log management system are crucial to ensure its continued effectiveness and compliance. When faced with storage constraints, the decision should always prioritize compliance and security, seeking solutions that enhance rather than compromise these aspects. This involves consulting with relevant stakeholders, including IT security, compliance officers, and potentially legal counsel, to ensure that the chosen strategy meets all obligations. Question 7. Benchmark analysis indicates that a financial services organization is seeking to ensure its Cisco ASA firewall configuration aligns with the security and regulatory expectations inherent in the Cisco ASA Express Security (SAEXS) framework. The organization has recently applied a security patch to the ASA and has reviewed general industry best practices for firewall management. Which of the following actions is the most appropriate next step to achieve demonstrable compliance with the SAEXS framework's implied regulatory objectives? Option A. Implement configuration changes based solely on general industry best practices for firewall management, assuming they will meet SAEXS requirements. Option B. Conduct a detailed audit of the ASA configuration against the specific security policies and documented regulatory mandates that the SAEXS framework is designed to address. Option C. Adopt the ASA configuration of a peer financial institution that has a strong reputation for security, assuming their setup is compliant. Option D. Rely on the recent security patch to automatically satisfy all SAEXS framework compliance requirements. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed audit of the ASA configuration against the specific security policies and documented regulatory mandates that the SAEXS framework is designed to address. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between implementing robust security measures and adhering to specific regulatory compliance requirements. The challenge lies in interpreting and applying the Cisco ASA Express Security (SAEXS) framework's guidelines for data protection and access control in a way that is both effective from a security standpoint and demonstrably compliant with the implied regulatory landscape that the SAEXS framework is designed to address. Misinterpreting or overlooking specific regulatory nuances can lead to significant compliance failures, data breaches, and reputational damage. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a comprehensive review of the existing ASA configuration against the specific requirements of the SAEXS framework, focusing on documented security policies and regulatory mandates. This involves a systematic audit of access control lists, ACL, firewall rules, VPN configurations, and logging mechanisms. The SAEXS framework, by its nature, is built upon established security principles and often reflects regulatory expectations for data security and privacy. Therefore, aligning the ASA configuration with these documented policies and regulatory mandates ensures that the implemented security controls are not only technically sound, but also legally and ethically defensible. This proactive and documented approach demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to regulatory adherence. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves making configuration changes based solely on industry best practices without explicit reference to the SAEXS framework or relevant regulatory mandates. While industry best practices are valuable, they may not fully encompass the specific compliance obligations that the SAEXS framework is intended to satisfy. This can lead to security controls that are technically strong but fail to meet specific regulatory audit requirements. Another incorrect approach is to assume that a recent security patch automatically brings the ASA into full compliance. While patching is crucial for addressing vulnerabilities, it does not guarantee that the overall configuration aligns with the comprehensive security and regulatory requirements of the SAEXS framework. Specific configurations for access control, data segregation, and logging might still be non-compliant. A third incorrect approach is to rely on anecdotal evidence or the configurations of similar organizations without independent verification against the SAEXS framework and applicable regulations. Each organization's regulatory environment and specific security needs can differ, making it dangerous to assume that another organization's compliance posture is directly transferable. This approach lacks the rigor required for demonstrable compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, evidence-based approach to security configuration and compliance. This involves 1. Clearly identifying the applicable regulatory framework, in this case, implied by the SAEXS exam. 2. thoroughly understanding the specific requirements of that framework as they relate to network security devices like the Cisco ASA. 3. Conducting a detailed audit of the existing configuration against these requirements. 4. Documenting all findings, remediation steps, and the rationale behind them. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating configurations to maintain compliance as regulations and threats evolve. This systematic process minimizes the risk of overlooking critical compliance obligations and ensures a robust, defensible security posture. Question 8. Research into the application of data access control principles mandated by a specific regulatory framework on a Cisco ASA firewall. A security professional needs to determine the most compliant configuration for sensitive data traffic. Option A. Disable detailed logging on the Cisco ASA for sensitive data traffic to improve performance, as regulatory requirements for logging are often flexible. Option B. Configure granular access control lists, ACL, and security zones on the Cisco ASA to enforce the principle of least privilege for sensitive data, ensuring that only authorized users and systems can access the data, and enable comprehensive logging of all access attempts and policy violations. Option C. Configure the Cisco ASA with default vendor best practices for firewall rules, assuming these align with general security standards without specific regulatory verification. Option D. Implement a broad, permissive access policy on the Cisco ASA that allows all internal traffic to reach the sensitive data servers, relying on server-level authentication to manage access. The correct answer is B. Configure granular access control lists, ACL, and security zones on the Cisco ASA to enforce the principle of least privilege for sensitive data, ensuring that only authorized users and systems can access the data, and enable comprehensive logging of all access attempts and policy violations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in balancing the need for robust security controls with the operational requirements of a business. The challenge lies in interpreting and applying regulatory compliance mandates to specific technical implementations within a Cisco ASA environment. Professionals must understand not only the technical capabilities of the ASA, but also the underlying principles of the regulatory framework to make informed decisions that satisfy both security and business needs. The pressure to quickly implement a solution without fully understanding the compliance implications can lead to significant risks. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the relevant regulatory framework, specifically focusing on data protection and access control requirements applicable to the organization's industry and data classification. This would then translate into configuring the Cisco ASA to enforce these requirements through granular access control lists, ACL, security zones, and potentially VPN policies that align with the principle of least privilege. The ASA's logging and auditing features would be configured to capture relevant security events, ensuring that compliance with reporting and monitoring mandates is met. This approach prioritizes understanding the why behind the regulations before implementing the how technically, ensuring that the solution is not just compliant on paper, but also effective in practice. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing a broad, overly permissive access policy without specific regulatory justification is a failure to adhere to the principle of least privilege, which is a fundamental tenet of most data protection regulations. This approach risks unauthorized access and data breaches, directly violating compliance requirements. Configuring the ASA solely based on vendor best practices without a direct mapping to specific regulatory mandates is insufficient. While vendor best practices often align with good security, they do not guarantee compliance with specific legal or industry regulations. This can lead to a false sense of security and actual noncompliance. Disabling logging or auditing features to reduce system overhead is a direct violation of regulatory requirements that mandate the tracking and reporting of security-relevant events. This prevents the organization from demonstrating compliance and investigating security incidents effectively. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to security and compliance. This involves first identifying applicable regulations, understanding their specific requirements, and then assessing the organization's data and systems to determine the level of risk. The technical controls, such as those configured on a Cisco ASA, should be designed and implemented to mitigate these identified risks and meet regulatory obligations. Regular audits and reviews of configurations and logs are crucial to ensure ongoing compliance and adapt to evolving threats and regulatory landscapes. Question 9. Quality control measures reveal that the Cisco ASA firewall is configured to log all traffic content passing through it, including the full payload of user communications and sensitive data transactions. This logging practice has been in place for an extended period without a specific review of its compliance implications. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and compliant approach to address this situation? Option A. Continue logging all traffic content as it provides the most comprehensive data for potential forensic analysis in the event of a security incident. Option B. Implement a broad logging policy that captures all traffic details and then rely on manual review of logs to identify and redact sensitive information before storage. Option C. Configure the Cisco ASA to selectively log security-relevant events and metadata, such as connection attempts, policy violations, and administrative actions, while excluding the content of user communications and sensitive data payloads, and establish a regular review process for logging policies. Option D. Disable all logging for traffic passing through the Cisco ASA to eliminate any potential for sensitive data exposure through logs. Correct answer is C. Configure the Cisco ASA to selectively log security-relevant events and metadata, such as connection attempts, policy violations, and administrative actions, while excluding the content of user communications and sensitive data payloads, and establish a regular review process for logging policies. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to maintaining the integrity and security of network traffic data, specifically concerning the logging of sensitive information. The challenge lies in balancing the need for comprehensive logging for security monitoring and incident response with the regulatory and privacy requirements that dictate what data can be retained and how it is protected. Overly verbose logging can lead to compliance violations, increased storage costs, and potential exposure of sensitive data. Conversely, insufficient logging can hinder effective security analysis and incident remediation. The professional must navigate these competing demands while adhering to the specific regulatory framework governing their operations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves implementing a granular logging policy that selectively captures relevant security events and metadata without logging personally identifiable information, PI, or other sensitive data unless absolutely necessary and appropriately protected. This aligns with the principle of data minimization, a cornerstone of many data protection regulations. By configuring the Cisco ASA to log only essential security-related events, such as connection attempts, policy violations, and administrative actions, while excluding the content of user communications or sensitive data payloads, the organization upholds its regulatory obligations. This approach ensures that the logs are useful for security purposes without creating unnecessary compliance risks or privacy breaches. It demonstrates a proactive commitment to data security and regulatory adherence, which is best professional practice. Incorrect approaches analysis. Logging all traffic content indiscriminately represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach violates data minimization principles and likely contravenes regulations that mandate the protection of sensitive data and PII. It creates an unnecessary risk of exposing confidential information in the event of a log breach and can lead to substantial fines and reputational damage. Disabling all logging for traffic, even for security events, is also a failure. This approach cripples the organization's ability to detect, investigate, and respond to security incidents. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence in network security and can be interpreted as a failure to implement reasonable security measures, potentially violating regulatory requirements for incident response and security monitoring. Implementing logging without a clear policy or review process, even if seemingly comprehensive, is problematic. This log everything and sort it later approach can lead to the accidental logging of sensitive data without proper controls, increasing compliance risks. It also creates an unmanageable volume of data, making effective security analysis difficult and potentially leading to missed threats. This lack of structured governance is professionally unsound. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to logging. This involves understanding the specific regulatory requirements applicable to their organization and the types of data being processed. A thorough assessment of what constitutes a security event and what information is necessary for effective monitoring and incident response is crucial. This assessment should guide the configuration of security devices like the Cisco ASA. Regular reviews of logging policies and configurations are essential to ensure ongoing compliance and effectiveness. When in doubt, consulting with legal and compliance experts is a prudent step. Question 10. The assessment process reveals that a critical security incident has occurred, impacting a segment of the network. The incident response team is under immense pressure to restore services quickly. Which of the following actions best aligns with the regulatory compliance requirements for incident handling as outlined by the Cisco ASA Express Security (SAEXS) framework? Option A. Initiate a full forensic data collection from all affected systems before any restoration attempts, ensuring all logs and configurations are preserved, and then proceed with a documented incident response plan. Option B. Temporarily disable logging on affected systems to reduce network overhead and speed up the restoration process, with a plan to re-enable logging once the immediate threat is contained. Option C. Rely on the security team's institutional knowledge to address the incident and restore services, deferring formal documentation until after the situation is fully resolved and operations have normalized. Option D. Immediately restore affected services using pre-approved rollback procedures, documenting the actions taken and the rationale for bypassing standard forensic data collection in the post-incident report. Correct answer is D. Immediately restore affected services using pre-approved rollback procedures, documenting the actions taken and the rationale for bypassing standard forensic data collection in the post-incident report. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge in regulatory compliance: the tension between operational efficiency and the strict adherence to security protocols mandated by frameworks like the Cisco ASA Express Security (SAEXS) curriculum. Specifically, the scenario highlights the difficulty in balancing the need for rapid incident response with the requirement for thorough, documented evidence collection and analysis, which is crucial for demonstrating compliance and for post-incident remediation. The correct approach emphasizes a systematic and documented process for handling security incidents, aligning with the principles of regulatory compliance and audit readiness. This involves not just technical remediation, but also meticulous record-keeping, clear communication channels, and adherence to established incident response plans. This approach represents best professional practice because it ensures that all actions taken are traceable, justifiable, and meet the audit requirements inherent in regulatory frameworks. It demonstrates a commitment to not only resolving the immediate threat, but also to learning from the incident and improving future security posture, thereby fulfilling the spirit and letter of compliance. Incorrect approaches fail to uphold these standards. One incorrect approach might prioritize speed over thoroughness, leading to incomplete data collection or undocumented actions. This creates significant regulatory and ethical failures. From a regulatory standpoint, it means the organization cannot demonstrate compliance with incident response and reporting mandates, potentially leading to fines or sanctions. Ethically, it represents a failure to act with due diligence and professional responsibility, as incomplete analysis can lead to recurring vulnerabilities or inadequate mitigation. Another incorrect approach might involve bypassing established security protocols for expediency, such as disabling logging or circumventing change control procedures. This is a direct violation of security best practices and regulatory requirements, as it undermines the integrity of the security infrastructure and the audit trail. It also creates a significant ethical lapse by prioritizing convenience over the security and integrity of the systems and data. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a structured incident response plan. This plan should include clear steps for identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and post-incident analysis, with a strong emphasis on documentation at each stage. When faced with a critical incident, professionals must resist the urge to deviate from established procedures without a clear, documented justification that aligns with the overall security objectives and regulatory obligations. The framework should encourage proactive training on incident response protocols and regular review of these plans to ensure they remain effective and compliant. Question 11. Which approach would be most effective in ensuring that a Cisco ASA firewall deployment meets regulatory compliance requirements while maintaining operational efficiency for a financial services firm operating under U.S. federal regulations? Option A. Implement a comprehensive security policy that mandates strict access controls, robust encryption for all data in transit and at rest, and regular vulnerability scanning, with all configurations and risk assessments thoroughly documented. Option B. Deploy the most restrictive firewall rule set possible to minimize the attack surface, even if it requires significant manual intervention for legitimate business traffic. Option C. Prioritize speed of deployment by enabling all available security features without a detailed risk assessment or understanding of their impact on business operations. Option D. Rely solely on the default security settings provided by the Cisco ASA platform, assuming they are sufficient for regulatory compliance. The correct answer is A. Implement a comprehensive security policy that mandates strict access controls, robust encryption for all data in transit and at rest, and regular vulnerability scanning, with all configurations and risk assessments thoroughly documented. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in network security, where a company must balance the need for robust security controls with the operational requirements of its business. The challenge lies in interpreting and applying regulatory frameworks to specific technical implementations, ensuring compliance without unduly hindering legitimate business operations. The pressure to quickly deploy a solution while maintaining security posture and adhering to compliance mandates requires careful consideration of various technical and procedural options. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough risk assessment and the implementation of security controls that are proportionate to the identified risks, while also considering the specific requirements of the regulatory framework. This means understanding the intent behind the regulations and selecting solutions that meet those objectives effectively. For example, if a regulation mandates data confidentiality, chosen solution should provide strong encryption and access controls. This approach ensures that security measures are not merely a checklist exercise, but are integrated into the business process in a meaningful and compliant way. It prioritizes a defense-in-depth strategy, layering security controls to provide comprehensive protection. Incorrect approach is analysis, implementing a solution that is overly restrictive and hinders essential business functions without a clear, documented risk-based justification is a regulatory failure. It suggests a misunderstanding of the principle of proportionality in security, where controls should align with identified risks. Such an approach can lead to operational inefficiencies and employee dissatisfaction, potentially encouraging workarounds that bypass security altogether, thereby creating new vulnerabilities. Adopting a solution that meets the minimum technical requirements of a regulation, but fails to address the underlying security objectives or introduces new, unmitigated risks is also a failure. This demonstrates a superficial understanding of compliance, focusing on form over substance. It can leave the organization exposed to threats that the regulation was designed to prevent. Deploying a solution without proper documentation of the risk assessment, the rationale for control selection, and the testing procedures is a significant compliance and audit failure. Regulatory frameworks often require demonstrable evidence of due diligence and adherence to policy. A lack of documentation makes it impossible to prove compliance during an audit and hinders future security reviews and improvements. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first thoroughly understanding the applicable regulatory framework and its specific requirements relevant to the technology being implemented. This is followed by a comprehensive risk assessment to identify potential threats and vulnerabilities. Based on this assessment, a layered security strategy should be designed, prioritizing controls that offer the most effective risk mitigation while considering operational impact. All decisions, including the selection of specific security controls and their configuration, must be meticulously documented, along with the rationale behind them. Regular review and testing of implemented controls are crucial to ensure ongoing effectiveness and compliance. Question 12. The review process indicates a newly identified threat vector that could potentially impact the confidentiality of sensitive customer data. Which of the following actions best represents a professional and compliant approach to addressing this situation? Option A. Classify the threat as low risk based on its novelty and defer a detailed assessment until a later, less urgent time. Option B. Conduct a targeted risk assessment to evaluate the threat's impact and likelihood within the current security environment, and determine if existing controls are sufficient or if new measures are required. Option C. Rely exclusively on the initial threat intelligence report from an external source to implement countermeasures. Option D. Immediately deploy a widely advertised security solution that claims to mitigate similar threats without further internal analysis. The correct answer is B. Conduct a targeted risk assessment to evaluate the threat's impact and likelihood within the current security environment, and determine if existing controls are sufficient or if new measures are required. Explanation. Scenario analysis. The scenario presents a common challenge in IT security where a new threat vector has been identified, requiring an immediate update to the risk assessment process. The professional must balance the urgency of the threat with the need for a thorough and compliant risk evaluation. The challenge lies in ensuring that the risk assessment not only addresses the immediate threat, but also integrates seamlessly into the existing security framework and adheres to the specific regulatory requirements applicable to the organization. This requires a nuanced understanding of risk appetite, impact, and the effectiveness of existing controls. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic reevaluation of the identified threat within the context of the existing risk assessment framework. This means understanding the potential impact of the threat on critical assets, the likelihood of its exploitation given current controls, and then determining if the residual risk falls within the organization's acceptable risk tolerance. This aligns with best practices in risk management, which emphasize a continuous and iterative process. Specifically, it adheres to the principles of proactive security posture management, ensuring that the risk assessment process remains relevant and effective in identifying and mitigating emerging threats. This approach is crucial for maintaining compliance with general security best practices and any specific regulatory mandates that require regular and comprehensive risk assessments. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately implement a broad, unverified security control without a proper risk assessment. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the fundamental requirement to understand the specific risk posed by the new threat. It can lead to misallocation of resources, implementation of ineffective controls, and potentially introduce new vulnerabilities. This approach fails to demonstrate due diligence and a structured approach to security, which are often implicit or explicit requirements in professional conduct and security frameworks. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the threat as low priority without a proper assessment of its potential impact and likelihood. This is a failure of professional responsibility. It neglects the possibility that a seemingly minor threat could have significant cascading effects, or that the likelihood of exploitation might be higher than initially assumed. This can lead to a false sense of security and leave the organization vulnerable to attack, violating the ethical obligation to protect organizational assets and data. A third incorrect approach would be to rely solely on vendor-provided threat intelligence without internal validation. While vendor intelligence is valuable, it must be contextualized within the organization's specific environment. Without an internal assessment, the organization might overinvest in mitigating threats that are not relevant to its infrastructure or underinvest in threats that are highly relevant but not highlighted by the vendor. This demonstrates a lack of independent critical thinking and a failure to tailor security measures to the organization's unique risk profile, which is a cornerstone of effective risk management. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this situation by first understanding the nature and scope of the new threat. This involves gathering detailed information and then applying a structured risk assessment methodology. The decision-making process should involve 1. Threat identification and understanding, 2. Impact analysis on assets and operations, 3. Likelihood assessment considering existing controls, 4. Risk evaluation against risk appetite, and 5. Control recommendation and implementation. This systematic process ensures that security investments are targeted, effective, and compliant with professional standards and regulatory expectations. Question 13. The analysis reveals that a new critical server is ready for deployment and requires immediate integration into the existing network infrastructure to support an upcoming business initiative. However, the server's security configuration has not yet undergone a comprehensive review for potential vulnerabilities. What is the most appropriate risk management approach to ensure both operational continuity and network security? Option A. Grant the new server immediate, unrestricted access to the network to avoid any disruption to the business initiative. Option B. Integrate the server with limited specific access only to the absolutely essential systems required for its immediate function, pending further security review. Option C. Proceed with full network integration after implementing basic, generic firewall rules to allow essential traffic. Option D. Delay full network integration until a thorough security assessment and hardening process for the new server is completed. The correct answer is C. Proceed with full network integration after implementing basic, generic firewall rules to allow essential traffic. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for network access with the long-term security posture of the organization. The risk assessment process, as mandated by general IT security best practices, and implicitly by the need to maintain a secure environment as expected in a Cisco SAEXS context, demands a structured approach to identifying, analyzing, and mitigating threats. The core difficulty lies in making a decision that is both operationally expedient and compliant with security principles, without compromising the integrity of the network. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it adheres to a systematic risk management framework, identifying the asset, the new server, the threat potential vulnerabilities, and the impact unauthorized access data breach. A comprehensive risk assessment allows for informed decision-making. This involves evaluating the likelihood and impact of the identified risks and then selecting appropriate controls. In this case, the control is the security review and hardening process before full network integration. This aligns with the principle of proactive security, which is fundamental to maintaining a secure network infrastructure, a key objective for any organization deploying Cisco ASA devices. It ensures that new components do not introduce unforeseen vulnerabilities. An incorrect approach that bypasses the security review and immediately grants full network access is professionally unacceptable due to several regulatory and ethical failures. Firstly, it violates the principle of least privilege, a cornerstone of information security. Granting broad access without understanding the security posture of the new server exposes the network to unnecessary risks. This could be seen as a failure to exercise due diligence in protecting organizational assets, which could have implications under various data protection regulations. Though specific regulations are not cited here, the principle is universal in IT security. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for the responsibility to protect sensitive information and maintain system integrity. Another incorrect approach, which involves implementing only basic firewall rules without a thorough vulnerability assessment, is also flawed. While some level of protection is better than none, it fails to address the full spectrum of potential threats. Risk assessment requires a deeper dive into the specific vulnerabilities of the new server and its intended function. Relying on generic rules might miss critical exploits that could be leveraged by sophisticated attackers. This approach represents a superficial attempt at risk mitigation, falling short of the professional standard expected in securing a network. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment methodology. This typically includes 1. Asset identification, clearly define what needs to be protected. 2. Threat identification, identify potential sources of harm. 3. Vulnerability identification, determine weaknesses that threats can exploit. 4. Risk analysis, evaluate the likelihood and impact of threats exploiting vulnerabilities. 5. Risk evaluation, prioritize risks based on their severity. 6. Risk treatment, select and implement appropriate controls, e.g., mitigation, avoidance, transfer, acceptance. 7. Monitoring and review, continuously assess the effectiveness of controls and update the assessment as needed. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are data-driven, proportionate to the identified risks, and aligned with organizational security objectives and best practices. Question 14. Compliance review shows that a critical vulnerability has been identified in a widely used network service. The security team has confirmed its severity, but immediate patching could potentially disrupt several key business applications that rely on this service. What is the most appropriate next step to manage this risk? Option A. Document the vulnerability and plan to address it during the next scheduled system maintenance window, which is several months away. Option B. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to understand the specific impact of the vulnerability on the organization's critical assets and operations, and develop a prioritized remediation plan that considers potential workarounds and testing before full deployment. Option C. Ignore the vulnerability for now, as there are no known active exploits targeting it in the wild. Option D. Immediately deploy the patch to all affected systems to eliminate the vulnerability as quickly as possible, regardless of potential operational impact. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to understand the specific impact of the vulnerability on the organization's critical assets and operations, and develop a prioritized remediation plan that considers potential workarounds and testing before full deployment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in IT security, where a newly identified vulnerability requires immediate attention, but the organization also has ongoing operational demands. The challenge lies in balancing the urgency of patching a critical vulnerability with the potential disruption to business operations. A hasty or poorly planned patching process could lead to system downtime, data loss, or further security incidents, while delaying the patch could expose the organization to significant risk. The professional must exercise sound judgment to mitigate risk effectively without causing undue harm. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured risk assessment process. This aligns with best practices in cybersecurity and regulatory expectations for managing IT risks. A thorough risk assessment would identify the specific threat posed by the vulnerability, assess the likelihood of exploitation, and determine the potential impact on the organization's assets and operations. Based on this assessment, a prioritized remediation plan can be developed, considering factors like the criticality of affected systems, the availability of workarounds, and the resources required for patching. This methodical approach ensures that security investments are directed where they are most needed, and that remediation efforts are effective and efficient, thereby meeting the organization's duty of care and compliance obligations. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately deploy the patch to all affected systems without any prior testing or impact analysis. This could lead to unforeseen compatibility issues, system instability, or service disruptions, potentially causing more damage than the vulnerability itself. This reactive, unmanaged approach fails to demonstrate due diligence in risk management and could violate regulatory requirements that mandate a controlled and assessed approach to security changes. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the vulnerability because it is not actively being exploited in the wild. This is a fundamentally flawed security posture. The absence of current exploitation does not negate the inherent risk. A responsible security professional must proactively address known vulnerabilities, as exploitation can occur at any time. This passive approach demonstrates a failure to adhere to the principle of proactive risk management and could lead to severe compliance breaches if an incident occurs. A third incorrect approach is to defer patching indefinitely until a major system upgrade is scheduled. While consolidation of IT changes can be efficient, critical vulnerabilities require timely remediation. Waiting for a scheduled upgrade, especially for a high-severity vulnerability, exposes the organization to unacceptable risk for an extended period. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of risk appetite and a failure to implement timely security controls, which is a common area of regulatory scrutiny. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to security management. This involves continuous monitoring for threats and vulnerabilities, followed by a systematic assessment of identified risks. When a vulnerability is discovered, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the vulnerability and its potential impact. 2. Assessing the likelihood of exploitation and the severity of potential consequences. 3. Evaluating existing controls and potential workarounds. 4. Prioritizing remediation based on the risk level. 5. Developing and executing a controlled patching or mitigation plan. 6. Verifying the effectiveness of the remediation. This structured process ensures that security measures are proportionate to the risks faced and that organizational resources are used effectively to maintain a secure operating environment. Question 15. Market research demonstrates that a significant number of organizations are experiencing security breaches due to sophisticated cyber attacks. In response to this, a security team is tasked with enhancing the security posture of their Cisco ASA environment, Which of the following approaches to risk assessment would best guide their efforts to effectively allocate resources and prioritize security investments? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive vulnerability scan and then prioritize remediation efforts based on the sheer volume of identified vulnerabilities, addressing the most numerous first. Option B. Replicate the security control implementations of industry peers who have recently reported successful security enhancements without conducting an independent assessment of their own environment-specific risks. Option C. Implement the latest security features and technologies available for Cisco ASA, assuming that advanced solutions will inherently provide the highest level of protection against all threats. Option D. Focus on identifying and analyzing the potential impact and likelihood of various threat actors exploiting specific vulnerabilities within the Cisco ASA environment to determine the most critical risks. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive vulnerability scan and then prioritize remediation efforts based on the sheer volume of identified vulnerabilities, addressing the most numerous first. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a robust security posture with the practical constraints of resource allocation and the evolving threat landscape. The decision maker must move beyond a superficial understanding of risk to a nuanced assessment that informs strategic investment. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the principles of a proactive and data-driven risk management strategy, which is implicitly expected within the operational context of Cisco ASA Express Security (SAEXS). By focusing on identifying and prioritizing vulnerabilities based on their potential impact and likelihood, an organization can allocate resources effectively to mitigate the most significant threats. This approach is ethically sound as it demonstrates due diligence in protecting organizational assets and data, and it aligns with the spirit of regulatory compliance by aiming to prevent security incidents rather than merely reacting to them. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the number of detected vulnerabilities without considering their severity or exploitability is professionally unacceptable. This would lead to inefficient resource allocation, potentially addressing low-impact issues while neglecting critical ones, thereby increasing the overall risk exposure. This approach fails to meet the professional standard of risk assessment by not differentiating between trivial and critical threats, which could be seen as a failure in due diligence and potentially a breach of ethical responsibility to safeguard the organization. Another incorrect approach, which involves implementing security controls based on industry trends or competitor actions without a specific risk assessment, is also professionally unsound. This reactive and imitative strategy ignores the unique threat profile and asset criticality of the organization. It can lead to misspent resources on controls that do not address the most pertinent risks, leaving significant vulnerabilities unaddressed. Ethically, this demonstrates a lack of independent professional judgment and a failure to adequately protect the organization's interests. A third incorrect approach, which prioritizes the implementation of the most advanced or expensive security technologies without a clear understanding of their necessity or effectiveness in addressing identified risks, is a common pitfall. This approach is driven by a desire for cutting-edge solutions rather than a pragmatic assessment of needs. It can result in a complex, unmanageable security environment and significant financial waste, while still leaving critical risks unmitigated. Professionally, this represents a failure to exercise sound judgment and fiscal responsibility in security investments. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment methodology. This begins with identifying critical assets and potential threats. Subsequently, vulnerabilities associated with these assets are identified. The likelihood of a threat exploiting a vulnerability and the potential impact of such an event are then analyzed to determine the overall risk level. Finally, mitigation strategies are developed and prioritized based on this risk assessment, ensuring that resources are directed towards the most effective controls for the most significant risks. This systematic approach ensures that security investments are strategic, efficient, and aligned with the organization's risk tolerance and business objectives. Question 16. During the evaluation of a proposed new VPN solution intended to enhance remote access performance, which approach best aligns with established cybersecurity risk management principles and regulatory expectations for ensuring the security of organizational data? Option A. Prioritize the performance improvements offered by the new VPN solution, deferring any in-depth security risk analysis until after the system has been fully deployed and is operational. Option B. Proceed with the implementation of the VPN solution immediately, relying on the vendor's assurances of its robust security features to protect organizational data. Option C. Deploy the VPN solution in a limited pilot phase, focusing solely on user experience and performance metrics, with security considerations to be addressed in a subsequent, separate project. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify potential threats, vulnerabilities, and impacts, and develop appropriate mitigation strategies before deployment. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify potential threats, vulnerabilities, and impacts, and develop appropriate mitigation strategies before deployment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in network security, where a new, potentially beneficial technology is introduced without a thorough understanding of its security implications. Professional is tasked with assessing the risk associated with this new VPN solution. The challenge lies in balancing the desire for improved performance and user experience with the imperative to maintain robust security posture and comply with relevant regulations. A hasty decision could lead to significant vulnerabilities, data breaches, or regulatory noncompliance, while an overly cautious approach might stifle innovation and hinder operational efficiency. The need for a structured, evidence-based risk assessment is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and comprehensive risk assessment process. This begins with identifying all potential threats and vulnerabilities associated with the new VPN solution, considering its architecture, configuration, and integration with existing systems. It then involves analyzing the likelihood of these threats materializing and the potential impact on the organization's assets, including data confidentiality, integrity, and availability. This analysis should inform the development of appropriate mitigation strategies, such as enhanced access controls, encryption protocols, and continuous monitoring. The final step is to document these findings and recommendations, presenting them to stakeholders for informed decision-making. This aligns with best practices in cybersecurity risk management, emphasizing proactive identification and mitigation of risks to ensure compliance with security policies and regulatory requirements. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing the VPN solution without a formal risk assessment is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It bypasses critical due diligence, potentially exposing the organization to known or unknown vulnerabilities. This directly contravenes the principle of due care and diligence expected of security professionals, and could violate regulations that mandate risk-based security controls. Relying solely on vendor claims of security without independent verification is another failure. Vendors may not fully disclose limitations or potential weaknesses, and their security posture might not align with the organization's specific risk appetite or regulatory obligations. This demonstrates a lack of critical evaluation and an abdication of professional responsibility. Focusing exclusively on the performance benefits while downplaying or ignoring potential security risks is a dangerous oversight. Security is not an optional add-on. It is a fundamental requirement. Prioritizing speed over security can lead to severe breaches, reputational damage, and legal repercussions, all of which are unacceptable from a regulatory and ethical standpoint. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured risk management framework. This involves 1. Asset identification, understanding what needs to be protected. 2. Threat identification, identifying potential sources of harm. 3. Vulnerability identification, recognizing weaknesses that threats can exploit. 4. Risk analysis, determining the likelihood and impact of threats exploiting vulnerabilities. 5. Risk evaluation, comparing analyzed risks against risk criteria. 6. Risk treatment, implementing controls to mitigate, transfer, avoid, or accept risks. 7. Monitoring and review, continuously assessing the effectiveness of controls and the evolving risk landscape. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, risks are managed effectively, and compliance with relevant regulations and ethical standards is maintained. Question 17. The evaluation methodology shows a systematic process for identifying and analyzing potential security risks associated with a Cisco ASA firewall deployment. Which approach best aligns with a comprehensive and actionable risk assessment within the context of the 500-260 SAEXS exams focus on practical security implementation? Option A. Relying on a general understanding of past security incidents within the industry without performing a specific assessment of the current ASA configuration and its unique threat landscape. Option B. Conducting an exhaustive, unprioritized scan of every conceivable vulnerability across the entire network infrastructure, regardless of its direct relation to the ASA. Option C. Focusing exclusively on identifying the most technically obscure and advanced vulnerabilities, assuming these represent the highest risk. Option D. Prioritizing the identification of critical assets, potential threat actors, and known vulnerabilities specific to the Cisco ASA's operating environment, followed by an analysis of the likelihood and impact of these threats exploiting those vulnerabilities. Correct answer is D. Prioritizing the identification of critical assets, potential threat actors, and known vulnerabilities specific to the Cisco ASA's operating environment, followed by an analysis of the likelihood and impact of these threats exploiting those vulnerabilities. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in cybersecurity risk assessment, balancing the need for comprehensive analysis with the practical constraints of time and resources. The professional must identify the most effective methodology for evaluating the risk posture of a Cisco ASA firewall deployment within the context of the 500-260 SAEXS exams regulatory framework. The challenge lies in selecting an approach that is both thorough and efficient, ensuring that critical vulnerabilities are identified without becoming bogged down in overly granular or irrelevant details. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the principles of effective risk management, emphasizing a structured and systematic evaluation. By focusing on identifying critical assets, potential threats, and existing vulnerabilities, it allows for a prioritized response to the most significant risks. This methodical process ensures that security investments are directed where they are most needed, directly supporting the goal of maintaining a secure network perimeter as mandated by general cybersecurity best practices and implied by the focus of a security certification like SAEXS. An incorrect approach that solely relies on a broad, unprioritized scan of all possible vulnerabilities fails to account for the specific threat landscape and asset criticality. This can lead to an overwhelming amount of data, making it difficult to identify actionable insights and potentially missing high-impact risks due to dilution. It also represents a potential regulatory or ethical failure by not demonstrating due diligence in identifying and mitigating the most probable and impactful threats to the organization's data and operations. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on the most technically complex vulnerabilities, while ignoring simpler but potentially more exploitable ones, is also professionally unsound. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of real-world attack vectors and can lead to a false sense of security. Ethically, it fails to protect the organization from common and easily preventable threats. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or past experiences without a structured assessment framework is highly problematic. This lacks objectivity and can lead to biased conclusions, failing to provide a reliable basis for security decisions. It also fails to meet the professional standard of evidence-based risk assessment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the scope and objectives of the risk assessment. 2. Identifying critical assets and their value. 3. Researching relevant threat intelligence and common attack vectors applicable to the technology stack, in this case, Cisco ASA. 4. Selecting a risk assessment methodology that is structured, repeatable, and scalable. 5. Prioritizing findings based on likelihood and impact. 6. Documenting the process and findings clearly. 7. Communicating results effectively to stakeholders. Question 18. Governance review demonstrates that the organization's current risk assessment methodology is insufficient for accurately identifying and prioritizing cybersecurity threats, leading to potential gaps in security control implementation. Which of the following actions represents the most appropriate and professionally sound approach to address this finding? Option A. Focus solely on updating compliance checklists to ensure all regulatory requirements are met, without altering the underlying risk assessment methodology. Option B. Delegate the entire responsibility of redefining the risk assessment process to an external cybersecurity consulting firm with minimal internal oversight. Option C. Immediately procure and implement a new, highly rated third-party risk assessment software solution to replace the current process. Option D. Conduct a thorough review and enhancement of the existing risk assessment methodology, incorporating updated frameworks and best practices relevant to the organization's threat landscape. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough review and enhancement of the existing risk assessment methodology, incorporating updated frameworks and best practices relevant to the organization's threat landscape. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in cybersecurity governance, where a recent governance review highlights a deficiency in the risk assessment process. The challenge lies in identifying the most effective and compliant method to address this identified gap. A superficial approach could lead to ineffective remediation, while an overly complex or misaligned approach might consume resources without achieving the desired security posture or regulatory adherence. The professional must balance immediate action with long-term strategic alignment and regulatory requirements. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review and enhancement of the existing risk assessment methodology. This aligns with best practices in cybersecurity governance, which mandate a structured and repeatable process for identifying, analyzing, and evaluating risks. By focusing on updating the methodology, the organization ensures that future risk assessments will be more robust, accurate, and aligned with its specific threat landscape and business objectives. This proactive stance demonstrates a commitment to continuous improvement and risk management, which is often a key expectation in regulatory frameworks governing information security. It ensures that the organization can effectively prioritize security investments and controls based on a clear understanding of its risk exposure. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately implement a new, unproven risk assessment tool without first understanding the root cause of the deficiency in the current process. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the critical step of diagnosing the problem. It could lead to a tool that doesn't fit the organization's needs, is difficult to integrate, or fails to address the underlying issues in the methodology. This approach risks wasting resources and failing to achieve the desired improvement, potentially violating principles of efficient resource allocation and effective governance. Another incorrect approach would be to solely rely on external consultants to redefine the entire risk assessment process without significant internal involvement. Consultants can provide valuable expertise. A complete handover without internal buy-in and knowledge transfer is professionally unsound. It can lead to a process that is not sustainable or understood by internal teams, making ongoing maintenance and adaptation difficult. This can also be seen as a failure to build internal capacity and ownership, which is crucial for long-term security effectiveness and can be implicitly or explicitly required by governance frameworks that emphasize internal responsibility. A third incorrect approach would be to focus only on compliance checklists without understanding the underlying risks. This is a superficial response to the governance review. While compliance is important, a risk assessment's primary purpose is to identify and manage actual threats and vulnerabilities, not just to tick boxes. Focusing solely on checklists can lead to a false sense of security, as the organization might be compliant with specific regulations, but still exposed to significant risks that are not covered by the checklist. This approach fails to meet the spirit of risk management and can lead to regulatory scrutiny if actual security incidents occur due to unaddressed risks. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such governance findings by first conducting a thorough root cause analysis of the identified deficiency. This involves understanding why the current risk assessment process is inadequate. Following this, they should develop a plan that addresses the root causes, prioritizing actions that enhance the methodology's effectiveness and alignment with organizational goals and regulatory expectations. This plan should involve relevant stakeholders, ensure knowledge transfer, and include mechanisms for ongoing monitoring and improvement. The decision-making process should be guided by principles of proportionality, effectiveness, and compliance, ensuring that the chosen solutions are both practical and robust. Question 19. Regulatory review indicates that a business unit requires access to a specific external service for critical operations. The initial network traffic analysis shows this access is currently permitted by a broad legacy access control list, ACL entry. The security team is tasked with reviewing and refining this access to align with current security posture and the principles of least privilege. Which of the following represents the most appropriate best practice approach for the security team to take? Option A. Broaden the existing legacy ACL entry to explicitly include the new service's IP address and port, ensuring it is clearly documented as an exception. Option B. Block all traffic to the external service by default and require the business unit to submit a formal risk assessment document for each individual transaction they need to perform. Option C. Implement a new, highly specific ACL that permits only the exact source IP addresses, destination IP addresses, and ports required for the business unit's legitimate access to the external service, while ensuring all other traffic to that service remains denied. Option D. Remove the legacy ACL entry entirely and instruct the business unit to use a VPN connection for all access to external services, regardless of the specific service or its criticality. The correct answer is C. Implement a new, highly specific ACL that permits only the exact source IP addresses, destination IP addresses, and ports required for the business unit's legitimate access to the external service, while ensuring all other traffic to that service remains denied. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in network security, balancing the need for robust security with operational efficiency and user access. The professional challenge lies in interpreting and applying security policies in a dynamic environment where business needs can conflict with strict security mandates. It requires a nuanced understanding of risk assessment, the principle of least privilege, and the specific requirements of the 500-260 Cisco ASA Express Security (SAEXS) framework, which emphasizes practical, efficient security implementation. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic, risk-based evaluation aligned with the principle of least privilege. By analyzing the specific traffic patterns and business justification for the proposed access, the security professional ensures that any granted access is necessary, documented, and appropriately secured. This aligns with SAEXS principles of implementing effective security controls that are tailored to the organization's needs and threat landscape, rather than applying blanket restrictions or overly permissive rules. It demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to maintaining a secure yet functional network. An incorrect approach that involves immediately blocking the traffic without further investigation fails to consider legitimate business needs and can lead to operational disruptions. This is a failure of due diligence and a lack of risk-based decision-making, which is implicitly expected in practical security deployments. It also fails to adhere to the spirit of implementing security controls that are proportionate to the risk. Another incorrect approach, which is to grant broad access without proper justification or segmentation, directly violates the principle of least privilege. This creates unnecessary attack vectors and increases the organization's exposure to threats, which is a fundamental failure in security best practices and would be contrary to the objectives of a framework like SAEXS. The professional reasoning process should involve: first, understanding the business requirement for the traffic; second, assessing the inherent risks associated with that traffic based on its source, destination, and protocol; third, determining the minimum necessary access to fulfill the business need; and fourth, implementing and documenting the security controls, e.g., specific ACLs, NAT rules, or VPN configurations that provide this minimal access while mitigating identified risks. This iterative process ensures that security decisions are informed, justifiable, and aligned with both business objectives and security best practices. Question 20. The control framework reveals that access control lists, ACL, on a Cisco ASA are becoming unmanageably complex due to frequent, granular changes for various user groups accessing different internal resources. To improve manageability and reduce the risk of misconfiguration, which approach best aligns with Cisco ASA best practices for maintaining effective security policies? Option A. Rely on the ASA's default deny-all behavior for any traffic not explicitly permitted, and only add specific permit statements as requested. Option B. Consolidate related IP addresses and ports into object groups and apply these groups within the ACL entries to simplify the rules and enhance readability. Option C. Manually edit each individual access control entry ACE to reflect the exact, current requirements, ensuring no unnecessary permissions are granted. Option D. Implement a policy of disabling unused ACL entries after a short grace period to keep the active configuration lean. The correct answer is B. Consolidate related IP addresses and ports into object groups and apply these groups within the ACL entries to simplify the rules and enhance readability. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in network security, balancing the need for robust access control with the operational demands of a dynamic environment. The professional challenge lies in interpreting and applying security policies in a way that is both effective against threats and practical for day-to-day operations. This requires a nuanced understanding of the Cisco ASA's capabilities and the underlying security principles it enforces. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and documented process for managing access control lists, ACL. By leveraging the ASA's object grouping feature, administrators can create more manageable, readable, and auditable ACLs. This directly aligns with best practices for network security management, which emphasize clarity, consistency, and ease of maintenance. Object groups reduce redundancy, minimize the risk of human error during configuration changes, and facilitate quicker troubleshooting. From a regulatory and compliance perspective, this structured approach aids in demonstrating adherence to security policies and audit requirements. An incorrect approach that involves directly modifying individual ACEs without considering the broader impact, or using object groups fails to adhere to best practices for maintainability and auditability. This can lead to complex, error-prone configurations that are difficult to understand and update, increasing the risk of misconfigurations that could inadvertently grant excessive access or block legitimate traffic. Such a practice could be seen as a failure to implement security controls in a robust and systematic manner, potentially violating general principles of due diligence required by many regulatory frameworks that mandate effective security management. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on the immediate functional requirement without considering the long-term implications or the potential for future changes, is also professionally unsound. This short-sightedness can result in configurations that are difficult to scale or adapt, leading to technical debt and increased security risks over time. It demonstrates a lack of strategic thinking in security management, which is crucial for maintaining a secure posture against evolving threats. Finally, an approach that relies on ad hoc changes without proper documentation or review bypasses essential security governance processes. This significantly increases the risk of introducing vulnerabilities or policy violations. It undermines the principle of least privilege and makes it impossible to effectively audit access controls, a fundamental requirement for many compliance standards. This lack of process can be a direct contravention of regulatory requirements mandating change control and audit trails. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the specific security policy and its intent. 2. Evaluating the available tools and features within the Cisco ASA to implement the policy effectively and efficiently. 3. Considering the long-term maintainability, scalability, and auditability of the proposed solution. 4. Documenting all changes and their justifications. 5. Seeking peer review for critical configuration changes. 6. Regularly reviewing and updating security configurations to adapt to evolving threats and business needs.